Okay. Visions of flight. The early years of aviation in Eretz Israel, 1913-1948. I want to start off with the back to 1913, the year before the First World War, when the area was known as Southern Syria, and it was a part of the Ottoman Empire. 1913, one of the first such flight adventures took place when the French air ace Jules Védrines left Paris in November in a Blériot 11 plane. He flew to Beirut, where he departed on December 17th, 1913 for Mikveh Israel near Tel Aviv. However, a strong wind forced the plane off its route, and he had to land on the beach near Tel Aviv. Next day, December the 18th, Védrines flew to Mikveh Israel, where his arrival was officially celebrated. Now, obviously, this was not a stamp produced in 1913, but it was part of a series put out by Israel to celebrate the first flights and beginning of aviation in the Holy Land. We now skip to the British Mandate and Imperial Airlines. This was the true start of aviation in that area. Is the British airline Imperial Airways. Imperial Airways was the early British commercial long-range operating from 1924 to 1939 and principally serving the British Empire, routes to India and the Far East. Most flights carried 20 passengers or less. Various types of planes were used, including flying boats. One of the stops was in Gaza, which I'm highlighting here, where mail and passengers were loaded and unloaded for the British Mandate of Palestine. In 1931, Arab riots broke out in Gaza, and Imperial Airways moved its operation to Tiberias, situated on the Sea of Galilee near Temach. It appears that nothing changes in Gaza ever. An interesting cover, extremely interesting cover, is the two Imperial Airlines first flight covers from 1931 from Gaza to Joppa and Gaza to Delhi. What that they included with the covers were what appears to be write-ups from the previous long ago collector. All the pertinent information is laid out in one form and inserted into the album with the cover. And I must admit, with some sense of shame, that I have copied this on Microsoft Word. It's got the name of the country, what on the occasion was their first flight, official mail from Gaza to Delhi, the address to the about address, Gaza, April 14th, 1931, Delhi, April 20th, 1931. Don't forget, this was a seaplane, so it took them a little bit of time. Stamps are from Palestine, and as he's noted here, it's a rare cover. The stamps are from Palestine, and they show on it the Jaffa Gate, which is still there. Of course, been there. All right. This is the first flight from London Galilee to Palestine Karachi. This was the flight where after Imperial Airlines moved their headquarters from Gaza to Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. I actually have a personal connection to this because for many years I lived on a kibbutz in Israel, where the old railway lines ran from Damascus through to Tiberias to bring passengers to continue the flight either to the UK or to India. Very interesting Imperial Airlines. Here you can see a very small what the timing was, where they were, when they were, and five back stamps. Imperial Airlines was not a safe airline. They had about quite a number of crashes, and quite a few people didn't make it. So let me just see if I can find what I wrote about. Okay, this is the crash of the Cygnus. On December the 5th, 1937, the short 23 Empire flying boat Cygnus crashed while taking off. Crashed while taking off from Brindisi. It was carrying mail to Alexandria on the Brindisi leg of the Imperial Airways Karachi London airmail service. The cover was loaded on flight 604 in Tiberias, Palestine, and the Sea of Galilee. In this crash, a steward and a passenger were killed. They have a Dome of the Rock mosque cancellation washed out after spending several hours underwater. The purple cachet damaged by seawater is this one over here, was applied in London. An official post office strip of brown gum paper was attached at the back to secure the letter. It has the royal insignia ER, Edward VIII, even though he had abdicated a year early. They're very cheap there. They didn't bother throwing it out. Okay, now we go to the crash of the Scipio. This was on 22nd of August, 1936. The short S-17 Kent flying boat crashed on landing in Mirabel Bay, Crete on August 22nd, 1936. It was carrying mail on the Alexander Brindisi leg of Imperial Airways Australia, England airmail service. The prior stop was in Tiberias. An airmail cover franked with 4 3mm green Palestine pictorial issues of Rachel's tomb, cancelled August 21st, 1936. Bold overprint in violet, accident d'Avion, addressed to Holland. On reverse side, cross stickers, posters, telegraphs, and telephones, number 509, date stamped August 29th, 1936. I'd just like to add a very quick little note here. On these covers, the stamps themselves, the philatelic part of it, don't actually mean anything, because they have no value. The definitives of the area that were stuck on an envelope. The value and the scarcity is not in the stamp. The value and the scarcity is in what this cover, aviation cover, relates to. And these are extremely, extremely rare covers, and it's very, very difficult to find them. We go here to Imperial Airlines. That is they merged with BOAC, and during the Second World War, they had to find all sorts of alternate ways to travel from India and Australia back to England. And this was called the Horseshoe Route. The Horseshoe Route was between Sydney, Australia, and Durban, South Africa. Now that's really the long way around to get to London. During World War II, it was used primarily by Imperial Airways and Qantas, using short Empire flying boats. Imperial operated the section between Durban and Singapore, while Qantas operated the section between Singapore and Sydney. The emergency route was necessitated by Italy entering the war, closing the route between Britain and Egypt. The Horseshoe Route was closed after the loss of Singapore. Here you can see it's addressed to London, a scarce postage period of 1940s, 2 Palestine accounts, stamps on it. It's the Sea of Galilee and a tomb. Right. Then we have the West African route, where was also the long way around. As you can see, it's marked here Clipper because the Americans were flying this route. The first Clipper 314 flight on the San Francisco, Hong Kong route left on February the 23rd, 1939 with foreign airmail. Passenger service lasted about less than 3 years, ending when the United States entered the war in December of 1941. However, the fall of France in 1940 caused some doubt whether the Atlantic service could continue. Pan Am sold 3 of its Clippers to Imperial Airlines and were primarily used on the UK West African route. There you can see the Palestinian stamps, and here someone had written Clipper on it, even though they did not go on the Clipper.
Excuse me, Neil, a question about that. Did that cover take a month to get there? Is that what I saw?
It probably took longer than a month to get there because they flew to Durban and then they were put on board ship because there was no air service between Durban and London because of the war. So if you put something in Australia or anywhere along, okay, you found that it would take maybe 2 months, 3 months, because nobody knew how long the boat was going to take. This shows you on the back, you have a sensor label tied by a red sensor hand mark repeated on its back, alongside the Miami purple transit stamp. In other words, it went from Durban to Miami and then to New York. So it really was, it was very, very slow mail. But what could they do? It was the only thing they could do. This is the last one in the series. This was a very unusual routing. It went from also from Palestine to Cairo to Brooklyn. It was a Palestine airmail cover dispatched from Tel Aviv via Cairo to Brooklyn and postmarked Alamli Road Post Office. Cover was back-stamped on its arrival in Cairo on November the 2nd, 1944, and then passed through Egyptian military censor. You can see stamped right here, is shown by the black censor stamp on both the face and on the rear of the cover. This cover was also censored by US Army Examiner number 2207, somewhere in the year it is right here, whose mark also appears on the face of the cover. We know what date it left. We have no idea what date it arrived because it's in very poor condition and practically falling apart, and it's very, very difficult to make out the arrival date. But I can assure you it was long after November the 2nd, 1944. This is a Czechoslovakian airmail to Palestine, a rather unusual route on 22nd of August 1947. It was routed via Jerusalem rather than Tel Aviv because of security disturbances at this time in Jaffa and approaches to Tel Aviv, Pardes Chana, arrival the 4th of September. This was a year before the independence of Israel, and there were numerous Arab riots throughout the country. A little bit something more interesting. This is a donation label. As you can see, it shows a little boy with a model plane and a Cessna small Cessna up here, and these stamps show gliders on them. What it was is that after the Second World War, after the Second World War, I just want to move. Okay, after the Second World War in Palestine, a campaign was started by the Jewish leadership in an effort to end the British mandate and become an independent state. The future leaders of the campaign knew that when the British gave up the mandate, that the Jews of Israel would be undefended against its Arab neighbors, sworn to their destruction. However, it was illegal under the Mandate government to allow clandestine training camps and weapons. So they were set up as clandestine camps, and weapon factories were also set up throughout the country. As part of this effort, an organization called the General Council for Hebrew Aviation and Eretz Israel came into being, ostensibly to teach young men how to fly small planes and gliders. These pupils were soon to be the nucleus of the Israeli Air Force during the War of Independence in 1948. To help fund the General Council, stamps were produced in several denominations to help raise funds. These were not authorized to be used for postage, but could be affixed to a letter if used together with the correct postage. Now we come through here into the modern times. And this is really interesting. The British Mandate ended on March the 15th. On April the 1st, they sealed the only international airport in Israel, Lydda, and turned it over to the Jordanian British Legion under the leadership of Colonel Glubb. So air communication with Palestine was cut off. This is from the Palestinian Post on the April the 1st, 1948, and it's labeled Air Outlet Sealed. Air communication with Palestine was cut yesterday when the British evacuated Lydda Airport and was taken over by the Arabs under the watch of the Arab Legion troops who were stationed nearby. The last plane out of Lydda boarded was an Air France aircraft which left yesterday morning. The Dutch KLM and Belgium Sabina announced a temporary suspension of flights. The action ended passenger and airmail service into and out of Palestine, and the post office in Jerusalem said it did not know what is to be the fate of airmail service. From Cairo, AP reported that the Iraqi and Egyptian state airways would fly their planes to Amman instead of Lydda. Armed Arabs also took possession of Wilhelmina, the German colony near Lydda airport. British troops took up positions there last week, but evacuated before the Arabs moved in. Wonderful people. Okay, March 16th, 1948. Insured parcel service from the US to Palestine discontinued. March 17th, TWA service to Palestine suspended. March 23rd, April and surface mails discontinued. April the 17th, night flying from Lydda Airport suspended because of lack of trained staff. April 25th, Lydda Airport is handed over to the Arabs. April 26th, all international air services with Palestine suspended. May 16th, proclamation of the State of Israel. July the 6th, 1948, Lydda Airport retaken by the Israeli Defense Force. November 25th, 1948, inaugural flight to and from Lydda by Czechoslovakian Airlines. What I should add, that not only did they close all the post offices, they also sent all the stamps back to London, and anything to do with the post office was sent back to London, and the post offices were closed. So there was no incoming, no outgoing, and no local mail whatsoever. So it was quite a very serious thing. But being clever, we found a way out of it. This was the Palestine emergency deliveries, petty airmail from the United States to Israel in May 1948. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I'm just going to give you a brief précis what this is. On April 29th, 1948, the US Postal Bulletin announced the suspension of airmail service to Palestine due to the closure of Lydda Airport by the British authorities. The Jewish Agency in New York had foreseen this move. On May 19th, implemented their backup plan and announced the establishment of Palestine Emergency Deliveries, PEDI, to carry airmail to Israel under the following conditions. The sealed envelopes addressed to the individuals residing in Israel should bear the requisite US postage of 25 cents per ounce. The letters must be enclosed in another envelope and addressed to the PEDI office in New York. Large quantities of mail began arriving immediately after the announcement. The initial batch was processed on March 20th and 21st by applying a serial number to each envelope, as you can see here, cover number 757. Okay. And a cachet marked first flight to Israel. A rectangular cancellation and a date stamp that included the word cancelled was applied and PEDI spelled out. All these markings are present on the cover shown, including the serial number 757. The first PEDI dispatch carried 1,200 letters as freight on a charter flight to Rome, where they were transferred to Czechoslovakian State Airlines, who carried them the rest of the way to Haifa Airport, arriving on June the 2nd. There, the round violet CSA cachet was added to each letter and delivered to the Haifa post office. Because but by the time that the airport was reopened in November, over 16,000 pieces of mail from the United States had been sent via PEDI. And those that were sent on the first day under the number, as part of the 1,200, are extremely rare and extremely valuable. This cover has a number of 757, which is among the lowest numbers that I've ever seen. Not only were the United States cut off, but the large Jewish community in South Africa were also cut off. So there was an Israeli travel agent called Peltours in South Africa. So they set up their link between Peltours offices in South Africa and Peltours offices in Israel. If you wanted to mail something to Israel, you addressed it to Peltours, PO Box 18 in Johannesburg. And when the envelope arrived, they would apply an Israeli stamp to it and fly it out on charter planes to Israel until links between the two countries were reestablished. Once again, thousands of letters were mailed via Peltours. Now we come to the present time. I cannot overestimate the value of LL to the State of Israel. They are part of the State of Israel. They are asked by the State of Israel to do a lot of things for them, as I will show you. And this was a cover that was produced when they held an exhibition, a stamp show, and here there's the stamp that was issued. It's a stamp of a 707 on the globe of the world, and there they show all their destinations, which were not a lot at that time. Today they're completely worldwide. LL's first mail flight. On the June 25th, 1950, the day of issue of Israel's airmail stamps, LL flew its first airliner, Constellation, from Lydda to New York. For this flight, an all-American crew was engaged because they had no one who knew how to run an airline. And was engaged. For the first time, mail was was carried across the Atlantic. The cover issued in Israel shows a first flight cachet, which is this one here, and a pictorial imprint of the control tower at Lida Airport and the airport hotel behind it. It's on the old Marsden catalogs, which are no longer produced. This was Marsden flight number 7. As you can see, here are the 3 stamps from Lida Aerodrome to New York. This is the first and the second definitive issue of AML stamps that were issued from June 1950 to March 1954 on a cover commemorating the inauguration of passenger flight service of El Al. In June 1950, the Israel Post Office issued the first definitive issue of AML stamps. The stamps depict the various bird motifs taken from ancient Jewish art of the period 2nd to 6th centuries. The second definitive AML stamps, issued up until March 1954, depict the landscapes of Israel. As you can see, none of these stamps have tabs. I don't know if you know that every Israeli stamp has a tab attached to it explaining what the stamp is. This is because in 1948, when the first issues were brought to the Postmaster General and the Ministry of Posts for them to have authorized the printing of these stamps, the Minister of Posts and Telegraphs said, absolutely not. He says, we are bringing in immigrants from 104 countries all over the world, and not all of them know Jewish history. Very few of them. They're Yemenites, there's Moroccans, there's Yemenites, there's from all over the Arab world. They have to feel that they are welcome, and they have to know what the meaning of the stamp is. So there's a tremendous difference between the value of stamps with tabs and stamps without tabs. This stamp without a tab is maybe worth $2. If you have the tab to it, it's worth $90. So obviously people collect tabs. This is El Al's first official flight. The return of Dr. Theodore Herzl's remains to Israel. Dr. Theodore Herzl was the, let me go right here. Okay, Dr. Theodore Herzl was the founder of Israel, even though he never made it during his lifetime. He was an Austrian lawyer who brought up the whole idea of the Jews going back to Israel. And every year they would have a Zionist conference, and every year all the Jews of Europe would get together and plan their return to Israel. Unfortunately, Dr. Herzl's remains did not make it. So the first official flight of El Al with an all-Israeli crew was one of a Sky Master to Vienna and back to Lida on the 17th of August, 1949, to bring back the remains of Dr. Theodore Herzl, the Zionist leader. No mail was carried on this flight, but on the day of return, a slogan cancellation was applied on all mail in Israel, which is right up here. While this is not an airmail cover, it commemorates this first official flight and is therefore connected with an airmail aviation history. Interestingly enough, in 1949, when El Al was founded, they had no crew, no planes, no nothing. So basically, they just registered a company. They borrowed a DC-6 from the army, painted it white, and put on the words in Hebrew and in English, Herzl, and this is the very first Israeli flight clue. One of the things which is really interesting about this particular cover is is that when you read all the research on this flight, it says no mail was carried on this flight. Somehow or other, I came upon an envelope from Vienna to Israel to celebrate, not to celebrate, to commemorate the bringing of Herzl's body to Israel. I have had this in Israel with me and have taken it to all the experts, and no one can explain who, what, or why, or how this Israel got on this flight to Israel. So hopefully we'll never find out, so it's one of a kind. Witness to a tragic incident. This is a cover from an LL constellation en route from London to Istanbul to Israel, which was shot down over Bulgaria on July the 1st, 1955. The plane was shot down by Bulgarian Air Force MiGs while flying from Vienna to Istanbul over Bulgarian territory. Captain Stanley Hanks and 58 passengers and crew lost their lives. A few postal bags survived the crash, and the mail bears a special oblong cachet in Hebrew. This piece of mail survived from the LL aeroplane shot down over Bulgaria, 27th July 1955. The letter was sent from Cologne, Germany to Tel Aviv, and it arrived on the 25th of July 1955. Apparently, the plane strayed from its course and was on the border of Bulgaria flying out and was shot down by MiGs. This is the type of thing that Israel would do for the state of Israel. These are LL special flights. The main reason for LL special flights to maintain contact with the Jewish diaspora, display the flag, cultural and sports. This is a Jewish diaspora special flight cover to encourage the Jews of the diaspora to come to Israel to celebrate Passover. Right here, as you can see, it's a special Passover flight, Lord Zurich, April the 1st, 1955. This is showing the flag as a special flight cover for the transport of the Knesset delegation to Westminster. The Knesset is the Israeli parliament. Here it is, Israeli delegation, the Conference of Interparliamentary Union, Lider, Westminster. Here we have cultural, the Israeli Philharmonic special cover to transport the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra on their European tour. And as it says right here, special flight, Israel Philharmonic Orchestra, and sports. Special flight cover to transport the Israeli Beitar boxing team to Greece. The interesting thing about this, that none of these covers are produced by the post office. It's all produced by private dealers. Okay. Momentous occasion, witnessed by me. First flight Tel Aviv to Cairo. On the 20th November 1977, Sadat became the first leader to officially visit Israel. We met with Israeli Prime Minister Begin. I was living in Israel at this time, and the news broke that Sadat had accepted an invitation to come to Israel. Of course, nobody believed it at that time, and we thought, oh, yes, Sadat's going to come to Israel. Oh, yes, definitely. And nobody did anything. Everybody ignored it. And about 2 weeks later, a flight arrives from Cairo filled with security people and photographers coming to set up the tour from Sadat. We still didn't believe it. On the night of 20th November 1977, the airport is packed. The whole of the Israeli parliament is there. They have guards of honor, they have music, they have choirs, and this plane flies in and the searchlight goes on. And I look at my wife and I say, nah, it's somebody else. It's not him at all. And the door opens and out walks Sadat. You could hear the whole country going, oh, because nobody could believe it. And then he met the Golden Mayer, which was even really something. And he was a good man, actually. Oh, okay.
Mr. Greenburg,
Yes.
would you like to take questions at this time?
This is a good time.
Would it be okay to take questions now?
We're over half. Yes, now is a good time. I am open for questions.
If you'll take and not and stop sharing where we can see you.
Oh, you want to see me?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, if I'd known, I would have combed my hair.
Yeah.
Oh, I must apologize for my South African accent. All right. Anyone have questions?
Well, first off, let me say you did an excellent job and kept me on the edge of my seat. And so I'm sure that there's some wonderful questions out there waiting for you.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's go. Okay, I won't even drink.
Yeah, it's stunning. I mean, the coverage you have, it's just delightful. You said something about the remains didn't get back, or did I mishear that? From Vienna to
I'm sorry.
the remains of
Regarding
the
Herzl.
Herschel, yeah, Dr. Herschel.
Dr. Herzl. You talking about Herzl?
Yes,
Yes.
the remains did get back then. I misheard then. I thought you said something like they didn't actually get back.
He
to
didn't
Israel.
actually make it back because he passed away.
He didn't make it back.
Oh, he didn't make it back. I'm
No,
sorry.
he didn't make it back.
Thank you. I thought there was another story there in addition.
We flew him back. It was the first flight. This was a man who his motto was next year in Jerusalem.
Right.
He basically worked himself to death. He is, without a doubt, the instigator. Because of him, Israel exists today.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wheeler, I think you were trying to say something.
Yeah.
Well, yes, explain the difference between the stamps with a tab and the stamps without a tab.
I can show you. Okay. I think I might have an envelope with a tab on it. I'll just check. If not, I'll run into my office. I'm running into my office. Don't go away.
I'll wait with bated breath.
Waiting with bated breath. Okay. Oh, I've got one right here. Okay. Can you see that stamp?
Yes.
Yeah, yes,
Can you see the tab?
no,
Yeah.
Okay.
hold it up again.
There's a perforation underneath the pictorial part of the stamp, and then there's the writing, and that's the tab, correct?
Oh,
Neil?
okay.
Yes.
Now
Okay.
now to make things really.
Oh, okay.
Okay, this one says, Le Rocher de Lyon. Actually, this one's in French. I don't know why. Oh, because it was, because it went to Zurich. This is explaining it. This is a stamp that shows a tourist stamp that shows a rock that's shaped like a lion's head. You wouldn't know unless you looked at the tab. Now, to make things really interesting, you get long tabs. There's another little tab under that, which nobody knows what it's for, but it's there. And then you get another, even more interesting, you get a long tab and a short tab and another little tab underneath. And what happened is when stamps first started coming out, nobody kept the tabs because you couldn't put the stamps on your envelopes. It was so long, so big. So they just threw the envelopes away. And then all of a sudden, everyone started collecting tabs, and that's what huge disparity between tabs, long tabs, short tabs, and no tabs. When you look at Israel in the Scott's catalog, they give you 3 prices.
Right.
Every country in the world produces two types of stamps, used and mint. Israel produces 6 types of stamps. You have used with tab, short tab, long tab, and you have mint with long tab, short tab, and the. So it's rather an adventure collecting this stuff. But I get rid of that.
Thank you.
Okay. No.
And thank you for explaining why that they took off the tabs in order to fit on the cover.
Because
That's something I always wondered about.
yeah, because it's you can have covers, but when people, I mean, you've got to think about this is in 1948. In 1948, they were in the middle of a war. They didn't have enough food, so they just got their letters and just took up the letter, and they didn't collect stamps. Put it like that. So. But it's very interesting today because to find stamps with tabs on. What happens is a lot of people overseas collect Israeli stamps, not because they're stamp collectors, because they want to support the state of Israel. And today they've passed away and they've left their collections to their sons or grandchildren, and they tell them how valuable this collection is. We spent a fortune on it, and they bring them the most beautiful handmade bound albums, and they mount white ace albums, and they mount their stamps in them from Israel. And I have people flying up from South America for me to look at their father's stamps to tell them how much they're worth. And I pick them up at the airport, and I take them to the hotel, and they come in wearing 30 albums. You know what I mean? And you open up the first one and you flip over 2 pages and there's no tabs. And now you've got to sit there and tell them, this is beautiful, they're wonderful, your father did a wonderful thing. They're not worth anything. The albums are worth more than the stamps. And you'd be surprised how it's the most horrible thing to have to say to someone, that your father's collection, your grandfather's collection, which he told you was worth a fortune, is not worth anything, and it's really awful. Anyway,
So now, Neil, I have to ask, are you telling me that I've actually tonight figured out what my inheritance was? My dad left me Israeli stamps with tabs, full sets for 3 straight years.
for how long?
During a 3-year period.
Okay. What years were they? Okay. All right. Are they
I've been
loose?
searching since Dad died.
Okay. Oh,
Find out what he left me that's valuable. And so far, the most valuable thing he left me were hinges.
oh. One of my daydreams is that I'm going to sit down someday and open up an album and find Israel 7 to 9, which is the first, and that's 3 stamps, and the only stamps in the whole of Israel that are worth anything. They used to be worth $6,000, and now they're worth $2,500. But so far, I've never seen 7 by 9. I've seen 1 to 6. I have 1 to 6, but I don't have 7 to 9. Okay. But if you'd like me to value them, I'll give you, are they loose?
No, actually, some of them I actually have in albums because a past member of ours spent 6 months coming over every weekend, and he sorted them out in 4 or 5 different sets. He kept a set, gave me a set, and I gave a set away, a set or 2 away. And yeah, so I have at least 1 or 2 full sets
Okay.
for a few years.
Are they loose or are they in an album?
Oh, no, he put them in albums for it. He put them in, not albums. They're never hinged. So they're in folders.
Oh, good. Speak to me when, they're in little holders, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Speak to me when we've finished. I'll give you my address if you'd like. Mail them to me and I will value them for you. But I'll give you the real true value, not the catalog value.
The real question is, and this is an open question to anyone in the club.
Yes.
I'm offering it to you first, Neil. Can I mail you all my United Nations stamps too?
No, let me tell you about your United Nations. And off subject here. My son-in-law has a relative in Orlando who's been collecting United Nations stamps for maybe 30 years. And he's got them all in blocks and plates and sheets and everything like that. The most beautiful albums in this huge safe in Orlando. And he called me and he sent me an album about 5-6 months ago, and I looked at them and I looked in the catalog, and I called him up and I said, "Stop buying them now." Okay. Like 55 albums of them. He says, "You want to value them for me?" I said, "Yes." They were worth about 28 cents each. Okay. And now, and I said, "You know what you do? Donate them. Donate to a Jewish." Hang on. You've got my daughter has a kid in Hebrew school here in Atlanta. Donate them to the school, because you're not going to get anything for them, you know. Anyway, so that's your United Nations stamps.
Yeah, this is wonderful, but this is the kind of conversation I enjoy in Stamp Club After Hours, as we call it. You know,
Yeah.
we play jazz low, and you know, we wear slouch hats and smoke cigarettes.
Yes. Sure.
So, Neil, could you continue with your wonderful presentation?
If Lloyd agrees.
Well, there's no problem about me, but I thought that we were going to give you part 2 at a later date.
Oh, okay. All right. Good.
Yes.
Good.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. I think that's good. Okay, then never mind. Never mind. Let's talk about stamps. We're
Let me ask a question to Neil.
I've got 50 pages still here. Yes. Yeah. And I have so much stuff to show you, and I see how, and what a pleasure it is to show it to you, because you're really interested in it. And I've been living in a desert, because I've been to like three stamp clubs in Atlanta, and nobody collects Israeli stamps.
Oh, no.
Oh, that's not clear.
Yeah.
Neil, let me ask you a question if I can. Scott brought up the issue of the Herzl return flight of the remains.
Yes.
And you said you asked and nobody really could confirm that there was anything carried on that flight. Is there a backstamp to show that it actually was really flown on that flight? Because I mean, you noticed who the addressee is of it?
Same dates. It's backstamped the same date. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
At the Israel Museum, they have a postal museum, and which I hope for, hopefully when I'm not around anymore, they'll put on display. I took it to them, and they're all oohed and awed, and I tell you something, there were a lot of dealers there, and they were fighting each other to offer me, you know, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. And I said, I have, in all my years that I've been collecting stamps, I have never sold a stamp, and never sold anything. Nothing.
Yeah, I noticed that it was addressed to an Führer, so which made me jerk a little bit, and it was a Führer, so my mind went into a different direction.
Yes, yeah. No, but basically, this was in 1949, and it's basically all kids. And the funny thing is, it's from Austria. I mean, Austria wasn't exactly the most friendly country to us. You know what I mean?
No.
So, yes.
Right. It's where the Führer came from, right? Yeah.
Exactly. You know. So that's why I don't drive a Mercedes today.
That's from Germany, though. That's not an Austrian car.
Yeah.
Neil, I have another question. I glitched early on in your presentation when you were first talking about Imperial Airways, and I saw a picture of a KLM flight, maybe a crash cover. Could you just refresh my memory what that was?
No, they were both the though, if those two crash covers are both Imperial Airways.
I thought I saw a picture of a KLM plane.
Let me just pull it out. I tell you, I love Imperial Airlines. The problem with collecting Imperial Airlines in America is that nobody collects Imperial Airlines in America. Nobody knows about them. I have to use English dealers, and they are crazy about the prices are crazy because so many people in England collect Imperial Airways.
No, they're crazy. There are lots of them on the auctions.
Yeah, and then you got to sit and wait.
Mhm.
What happens to my crash covers? Where do I put them? Did I put them back in here?
And pull the slides.
Oh, I haven't pulled them. Oh, let me go back to them. I haven't pulled them out. I'm just looking at, okay. Let me bring them up to you. Hang on a minute.
It was right after you started talking about Imperial Airways. First couple of slides.
Okay. Do you want to go back a bit? There they are. No, I've got Imperial Airways. No, I know. No.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The
Oh, yeah.
cover says KLM up at the
KLM.
top.
You know, this is the Cygnus. Okay, and this one is the Scipio. And that's the only.
On that cover, at the top, it says KLM.
Oh, it's scratched out. Yes, that's very, something I've never I've never noticed that. Yes, it says a KLM, but it's scratched out. So obviously,
I didn't go on KL. Okay, that's what I saw. Okay, thank you.
Obviously, they didn't want to waste an envelope.
Mhm.
So, that's okay. That means I'm going to have to change my page now. All right. Okay. All right. Anything else? Hang on. I'm just looking here if there's anything that I really want to show you, even though that I know I'm going to be in trouble. Okay. This is something. Okay. Share screen. Okay, I'm going to find. No, I don't want that one. I want this one in the beginning.
Do we have a slide of it?
No, hang on. No, I'm going to do Zeppelin.
Okay. Yeah.
Get to IKEA and it'll be before it's this way. Hang on. Keep going. IKEA. Okay, hang on. There it is. Okay. All right. This is something which is very
Oh,
near.
wow.
Beautiful.
That's something that's really near and dear to my heart, and my heart aches because of it. In March 1929, the Zeppelin LZ-127 flew from its base in Germany to Palestine and returned on a non-stop flight known as the Aerophilately. On March 26th, it arrived over the coast of Haifa and continued over to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and then over the Dead Sea at minus 468 feet below sea level, because the Dead Sea is way below sea level. I know, I used to drive to work every day.
Yeah.
Each flown piece of mail received the cachette in red for the Aerophilately, showing the airship over the pyramids, even though they never approached the strip. On this trip, 2 terminal airbags and 2 onboard mail bags were dropped over Ramla. Small parachutes were attached to each mail pouch, but due to strong winds, one drifted away and never found. That's what I use for presentations. However, when this is in a frame, I do add a few special other little things which I'd like to read to you now.
Yeah.
Dr. Wolfgang von Weissel later reported that while cruising over Jerusalem, the Jewish feast of Purim was celebrated by reading the scroll of Esther, and the passengers and crew toasted Palestine with Carmel wine brought along by a fellow passenger. Now, this was in 1929, and they were toasting Palestine aboard a German Zeppelin, and 4 years later, Hitler was voted in as chancellor. So this really gives you an idea of why I love collecting Aerophilately, because you're not only collecting Aerophilately, you're also collecting history
Right.
and other things like that. In 4 years, they weren't drinking champagne and toasting Palestine. In 4 years, I think it was Kristallnacht already. So anyway, thank you very, very much. I think I'm going to let you guys go now, because I'm sure you must be saying enough.
Oh, this was
But
wonderful.
Fascinating.
Actually,
Fascinating.
this was
Really great.
terrific.
It was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I know that every single person watching this meal was just amazed and educated. And I agree with you. Collecting covers, it's collecting history, really.
One of my problems is in the last 2 years, I've been buying, but not doing anything. I just couldn't get into the research and things like that. And I've stopped now that they're coming out with all sorts of auctions, and I really would like to buy. And I said, no, I'm not allowed to buy anymore, because I've still got a mountain. Mounting is nothing. It's the research that because we're so far away from everything.
Yeah. Well, it's gotten easier, obviously, with the internet. I mean, be able to look things up, and I assume you belong to philatelic societies that have libraries.
May I show you one more cover before we finish?
Oh, all right. No kidding. No, that'd be delightful. Thank you. Oh, by the way, the mark on one of those on the crash flight, damaged by seawater. I think I've seen that same stamp applied in London to mail damaged in ship mail and packet mail.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very common, because that's it. More damage. There's not much. What's nice is that they used a thing from Edward VIII when he wasn't even the king anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a real Israeli, we're not really fans of the British. Okay, let me just go through this. I hope there's not somebody there who's British. Okay, this is something
we have quite an eclectic club, so yes.
This is something where I've also experienced personally. After the 6-day war relieved the tension, everyone used to got in the back of trucks and used to go, and we went into the Sinai on tours. They would put seats in the back of they put benches in the back of trucks, and we'd all pile into them with our sleeping bags, and off we went to the Sinai, because no one ever been to the Sinai. This is Santa Catarina's monastery in the middle of Sinai. It's actually St. Catherine's, commonly known as Santa Catarina, lies in the Sinai Peninsula at the foot of Mount Sinai, where Moses got the tablets, which spoiled all our fun. You know what I mean? You can't do this, you can't do that. Okay. The monastery is Greek Orthodox and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was built between 548 yesterday and 565. This monastery is one of the oldest working Christian monasteries in the world. This is what it looks like. Okay, all right. As you can see, it's completely surrounded by a wall, and this was the original gate up here. It was basically a hole in the wall where the monks used to drop down a rope with a basket on it And there was a tribe of Bedouin who have been looking after them since the 5th century, basically. They would fill up this box with provisions and things like that, and they would haul it up. As you can see, there's no gateway to get into the monastery. Being very clever monks, to cater to the tourists, they eventually knocked through over here to get in. The archaeologists who arrived there after they opened up the monastery were amazed to find a library that dated back to the 5th century. They were found stuff in there which you would not believe. Unfortunately, what had happened, that the stuff was rotting away because of the heat, no air conditioning, and there was mold. So they basically closed the library, and they've been, ever since '67, they've been redoing the books and things like that. Up here, and you can see our little holes in the wall. This is caves where single monks would spend their lives. The most interesting thing about this monastery is this building over here. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see here? One of the monks was a young guy. They're all Greeks, and they all wear black with funny hats and big beards, and he was in his mid-20s. And he took us to see this building, because apparently you can't go by yourself. He opens up the door, and the entire building is filled with bones. Disconnected skeletons, heads and skulls in one place, bones, different bones, all stacked up very neatly. If you put them all together, you get a couple of thousand skeletons. And he says, what we do here when we die, they bring us into the charnel house and they leave us here, and in the heat, our flesh decomposes, and then they take us apart and they add us to the pile. And in the middle of this is a skeleton in one of the monks' uniforms with a hat and everything. He was the founder of the mosque, and he is a real skeleton, and they got him stuck up in the middle. And everybody looking like, this is crazy. And the mosque turned around and he says, this is where I too will be one day. And I thought, oh, my goodness, you know, I wouldn't like to end up like that. So, very, very, very interesting. Anyway, so.
What happened to the library? I mean, was it papyrus, and was it just, I mean, you know, the thing is, in those dry climates, they last a long time.
Yeah, but it shows you the care they put into this, that each bone is separated and put into its own pile. They're not just spread around, you know, and all the skulls are stacked up on shelves. Can you imagine how many monks have been there since the 5th century?
Actually, I was, Neil, I was asking about the library.
Oh, yeah.
What did they recover from? I mean, they must have recovered 6th century stuff. That
the Bible, copies of the Bible going back, you know, to the 5th century. Greek books by Greek philosophers, you know, philosophy books, Greek books. They just collected a ton, maps, old maps, everything. Everything you could smell the library when you walked into the building. They just let it rot. So now they redoing everything, and they're taking it away from them to putting it in a properly ventilated. It's like the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can't touch them; they fall apart. Okay. So
I mean, because the Dead Sea Scrolls are not much older than what you're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as you can see, so this is Mount Sinai. This was the first flight, Mount Sinai Airport, St. Catherine inaugural regular flight by Viscount, and it's signed by the captain of the plane. And this is the stamp from the monastery, and this is from the Israel Bird Service. And this was, funnily enough, this was before the 6-Day War. They produced a stamp with a Mirage fighter plane on it, So they used it for this, on this particular envelope. A lot of things, and what happened is we stayed overnight there, and we walked up to the top of Mount Sinai, but we slept in sleeping bags. I want to tell you something. It's hot as hell during the day, and at night you freeze your,
Yeah.
I'll be polite, you freeze your tootsies off, you know. It's really, anyway, guys, I want to take this opportunity of saying thank you, thank you, thank you. I've had a wonderful time. I hope you've had a wonderful time.
Thank you.
This
Yes.
was really
Thank you.
Fabulous.
Thank you,
Very
Neil.
interesting.
Fabulous.
Putting together part 1 to part 2 through part 65.
By the way, I love the cover. I don't think there are many covers that converge both one of the oldest monasteries in the world and a jet fighter plane.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, I think that. I don't even know. First of all, this was on. They don't have a year on here. Oh yeah, this is 1971.
I know. I mean,
I got it from 1967 from, you know. So,
but that neck of the woods, I guess you're always combining ancient and modern. So it's
guys, I'm going to get out here and I'm going to let you all go home. And
well, we stay on a little bit afterwards, and we.
Hello, Lloyd. We can't hear anything.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, this little button said unmute, but you know, I spelled it out and I thought I knew what it meant. Okay, thank you. Anyway, what I was going to say is I can't remember where I stopped last time, so I sort of like arbitrarily picked a spot, and I said, if I've shown this to you before, please yell and scream at me, and we'll go from there. Okay, thank you. Let's start with the ingathering of the exiles. Okay. Aliyah is Hebrew for ascent. And when we talk about Aliyah, we're talking about the immigration of the Jews from the diaspora to the land of Israel, Eretz Israel. It's one of the most basic tenets of Zionist ideology. The return to the Holy Land has been a Jewish aspiration since the Babylonian exile. Large-scale immigration to Eretz Israel and later Israel began in 1882. Since the establishment of the State of Israel, more than 3 million Jews from over 90 countries have arrived in Israel. This is a cover which is put out by the United Jewish Appeal, and this is shows new immigrants arriving in Israel. In America, there's a group called Nefesh B'Nefesh, where you go, and if you want to immigrate, you go there with your wife or by yourself, and you attend a series of lectures. They do perform tests on you. They find out what you can do, if they can find work for you. And basically, they take care of everything. And a couple of months later, you find yourself on a plane, and one night later, you arrive in Israel. They pick you up, and they look after you for 6 months to a year. Okay. In 1985, El Al mounted a massive airlift known as Operation Moses to bring Ethiopian Jews to Israel. And one day, 34 aircraft landed at Addis Ababa, and 14,325 refugees were flown to Israel. This is still continuing today because these people walked hundreds of miles because they heard that the planes were arriving, because they had a belief that they were going to ascend to the land of Israel on the wings of angels. Yes, they did ascend to Israel on the wings of angels, basically on the wings of Israel Airlines. We did the same thing in Operation Magic Carpet. From 1948 till the early 1970s, around 900,000 Jews from Arab lands left, fled, or expelled from various Arab nations. In the course of Operation Magic Carpet, 1949-1950, nearly the entire community of Yemenite Jews, about 49,000, immigrated to Israel. What we did was basically we packed them into aircraft and we took off, and today they have assimilated. They're doing very, very, very well. What I have here is a cover from the Cleveland chapter, Society of Israeli Philatelists. It's just 10 years since Operation Magic Carpet. From the Sinai, you can see there to Jerusalem. Okay. This is the first flight out of Lida Airport after declaration of the State of Israel. This is Czechoslovakian Airlines, CSA, on November the 24th, 1948. What happened is Lida Airport, as it was called that time, was turned over by our friends, the British, to the Arab Legion in April 1948, even though they weren't due to give up the mandate until May 15th. So that left Israel without an international airport. There were several large battles fought for the airport, and eventually the Arab Legion went back to Jordan and turned the airport over to Israel. And it took a couple of months, 4 months to redo the whole airport, the damage that they had caused. They had smashed everything. They literally burnt everything down. So it took a few months to start flights up again. This was after the 1948 Israeli War of Independence. The Lida Airport was reopened the 24th of November 1948. On the same day, a Czechoslovakian plane landed, was the first to use the airport. It took off a few hours later, carrying an estimated 500 letters that were at the airport post office. The CFSA agent made a rubber stamp available, which was applied in violet to all the outgoing mail. These covers from the flight from Lida to Prague among the rarest items in early airmail history of Israel. People at that time weren't interested in stamp collecting. They didn't know anything about philately. They got the letters, they opened up the envelopes and threw the envelopes away. There are very few of these covers available on the market today. It says, best wishes for your flight, for your first flight from Lida Airport, State of Israel, Czechoslovakian Airlines, Tel Aviv. And it's postmarked Lida Aerodrome. Remember I was telling you about the Dor Ivri? This is a Dor Ivri stamp for 15 mils. You see here it says Dor Ivri. This is the first issue of coins back in the over 2,000 years ago. And this is a stamp its name has been changed to Israel. This is 7 to 9, and this is 1 to 5. This is number 1. Tel Aviv to Prague, an airmail cover sent from Tel Aviv to Prague. Open services to and from Israel on the 22nd of June, 1948. Most air material was sent through Haifa and a smaller number through Sde Dov in Tel Aviv. On the 24th of November, Lod Airport was opened. And here you can see these are 220 mil stamps, and it says Dor Ivri. Where am I? Okay. All right. Air France, the first airmail service, Haifa, Rome, and Paris. The first regular airmail service was opened on Air France between Haifa and Paris via Rome. Covers carried on this flight have a special rubber stamp cachet in violet ink in Hebrew and French, and show the Haifa dispatch marks June 10th, 1948. These covers are rare because only a limited amount of mail could be carried. I think they used DC-10 at that time. Here you can see in French, Premier Flight, Israel, France, Door Every stamps, Premier Flight again, Door Every. This is probably the only one of the very few issues of Aerophilately where the stamps are actually worth something, because they were never issued again under that name. Archaea. Archaea was founded in 1949 as Israel Inland Airlines, when it became clear that there was a demand for a local airline to connect Tel Aviv with the different regions of Israel, especially with Eilat, Israel's important seaports situated on the Gulf Aqaba. I don't know how many of you remember the movie Lawrence of Arabia. What was his name?
Lawrence.
Oh no. Anyway, Lawrence. Part of the movie was Lawrence was struggling through Eilat, through the desert, and they were going to attack a port that was held by German and Turkish troops called Rush, and they swept down in Rush with their horses and captured us. This is Rush was the first name of Eilat. This shows the airport here. Today, this is a premier tourist vacation area. People come from all over the world, and what you see here, the one little building, is today maybe 20,000 hotel rooms. Flights commenced in 1950 with de Havilland DH-89 aircraft, following with DC-3s to connect major towns in Israel from Rosh Pinah in the north to Eilat in the south. They're still around, okay. These were their special flights after the Six-Day War, 1967. The resumption of air services between Rosh Pinah, resumption of air services in Menachem, resumption of air services to Eilat, and resumptions to air services of Jerusalem. As you can see, each one is with its own little postmark, and there's a lot more in this series, but that's all I'm showing you now. Okay, I don't know if I showed this one to you. From when the British also closed all the post offices in Israel in April of 1948, they sent all the stamps back to England and took all the postmark stamps with them. So from April as of April, there was no international mail going in and out of Israel. So what they did was they organized a private air transport company from May, it was meant to be from May the 1st to May the 15th, after they became independent, to handle mail from Haifa to foreign countries upon the payment of a fee in addition to the regular payment of the mandatory government. A receipt from this was actually thousands of these stamps were printed. Today, there is still an ongoing argument among Israeli stamp collectors whether these are actual stamps, labels, or they're just plain forgeries, because apparently the income of these stamps was supposed to be divided between the Israeli Post Office and the PATCO, Palestinian Air Transport Company, but as far as is known, this was never done. Although of no philatelic value, these stamps are interesting as an example in the time when Palestinians dreamed of their own stamps, who were not sure what tomorrow would bring. I'd just like to make one little off comment here. Prior to the independence of Israel on May the 15th, The Jews were known as the Palestinians, and the Arabs were called Arabs, which is quite a reversal of today. This was a totally illegal cover. It has all the stamps here are not stamps. Okay, this is from the Patco company. None of the stamps or labels are legal or a legal philatelic item. The top 3 items are the Jewish National Fund donation items. These are the people that plant the trees in Israel, which cannot be used for postage. If used, they must be accompanied by a regular postage stamp. In other words, they were like donation stamps. You bought them and you stuck them on your ladders. The 2 Palestinian stamps were also illegal at that time because there was no more Palestine. It would become the British Mandate. They were withdrawn from use on May the 15th, 1948. The 25 milliliter Patco stamp and the 25 milliliter Patco stamp were also illegal because originally the income from these stamps was supposed to be divided between the post office and Patco. But there again, no philatelic value. So here we have a cover which actually was stamped, was actually left the country and with no address. Nobody knows how this happened, and all the stamps are illegal. We think this is the only one that exists. All right, the London Forwarding Office. After Israel became independent, all relations were broken with the Arab world, and there was no way that an Arab living in Israel could actually mail a letter to any other Arab country. So what they did was the covers were mailed to the London Forwarding Office, contained envelopes addressed to the final destinations without postal stamps affixed, but included 2 international reply coupons. This postal address was used by both Israeli Arabs as well as by the residents of Gaza and the West Bank as a drop box for mail for their friends and family in Arab countries which did not recognize Israel. The service was later discontinued due to security concerns as well as being time-consuming. This cover was originally purchased in Israel. It's postmarked in English on the 30th of the 10th, 1974, from Al Burai, a Palestinian refugee camp in central Gaza. Nothing changes, as well as the name in Hebrew. The postmark was issued by the Israel Defense Force at the time stationed in Gaza. The cover is flanked by 2 Israeli stamps, totaling 80 agorot. They're both town emblems. This is Beit Sha'an, and this is Ein Gedi. On the reverse is the postmark 311074 in Hebrew, also issued by the IDF. The Jordanian occupation of Palestine. This cover was postmarked in Nablus 1949 because Jordan in 1948, in spite of many attacks by the Israelis, were unable to recover the city of Jerusalem or the West Bank. We had to wait 19 years until 1967 when we were able to take back, which was truly ours. And let me tell you something, this was the proudest period of my life because I was involved in this. This cover is postmarked Nablus 1949 and franked by 4 King Abdullah overprinted Palestine states stamps, totaling 25 mils plus 1 tax stamp issued to help with the welfare fund for Arabs in Palestine. And this was an air letter issue of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The air letter is postmarked 1951, even though the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan was changed in 1949 just to be called the Kingdom of Jordan, and franked with 2 airmail, plain and global airmail stamps totaling 25 milliliters, plus 115 millimeter Aid Palestine postal stamp. Now we go to the Egyptian occupation of Palestine. In May 1948, after the British Mandate of Palestine ended and the State of Israel was proclaimed, Egyptian troops occupied the Gaza Strip and established a postal organization using definitives overprinted with the name Palestine, as you can see them here. Okay. Furthermore, a series of airmail stamps, 12 values, were issued using Egyptian airmail stamps. The King Farouk in the medallion with a barrage and aeroplane overprinted in Palestine in red and black. And here you can see poor King Farouk sitting in his little little hole there, and he was deposed a few years later. And what they did was, instead of reissuing stamps, they just drew black bars over his face. So poor King Farouk. Okay, King Farouk was widely condemned for his corrupt and ineffectual government and the Egyptian army's failure in the 1948 war to prevent the creation of the State of Israel. Public discontent against Farouk rose to new levels. On July 23rd, 1952, the Free Officers led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, I'm sure that name will ring a bell for you, launched the Egyptian Revolution. Farouk was forced to abdicate and went into exile in Monaco in Italy, where he lived for the rest of his life. Shortly after the coup was made to remove, an effort was made to remove the king's portrait from all official documents, including stamps, coins, and banknotes. This included the airmail stamps of the Egyptian-occupied Gaza Strip in Palestine. 3 heavy black bars were printed over the airmail stamps of the Egyptian-occupied Gaza Strip in Palestine. 3 heavy black bars were, in addition to the difference in types and colors of the Palestine Arabic overprint in the censored issued and the original issue of 1948. These were the first Palestinian airmail issues, which were errors. We have a certificate of this. In May 1948, after the British Mandate of Palestine ended and the State of Israel was proclaimed, Egyptian troops occupied the Gaza Strip and established a postal organization using definitives overprinted with the name Palestine. Furthermore, a series of airmail stamps, 12 issues, were issued using the Egyptian airmail typed King Farouk medallion. Okay, as you can see, these were cancelled after King Farouk was deposed. This is a sheet of the stamps. King Farouk was still in power, but they were overprinted Palestine. What is interesting here, as you can see, there's a lot of double printing, very poorly printed. You can hardly make out the name. Very interesting from a philatelic point of view. This is an unusual destination. This is one of the, when I talk about the diversification of Aerophilately, is there are so many different parts of it that every part can be a collection on its own. I have a whole collection of balloon postage, which is part of my Aerophilately collection, but doesn't have to be, because I have enough here for maybe a 3 or 4 frame exhibit. So that's the beauty of Aerophilately, because here's another one, polar mail. Okay, it went through Israel. This is the Davis station in Tel Aviv, and here it says Davis, Australia, Antarctic Territories, first day of issue. Okay, I'm not finished. I'm now caught up. Another section of Aerophilately Another diversification is sports covers. Very, very big in Israel. They're absolutely sports mad. Soccer and basketball. The Maccabi is an international Jewish athletic event. It's the Jewish Olympic Games held in Israel every 4 years under the auspices of the Maccabi Federation, and it's worldwide. Originally conceived in by a 15-year-old by the 1912 Stockholm Olympic Games. The games were first held in 1932. Okay. During the planning stages, the games were nicknamed the Maccabion, and in 1932 was selected the year to host the first games, marking the 1800th anniversary of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Maccabi is open to Jewish athletes as well as Israeli athletes, regardless of religion. Arab Israelis have also competed in it. Here is, as you can see, they issued a collection of stamps. This was the special flight stamps for the Maccabi Games. This was the 1935 Maccabi Games. Pith helmets. Everybody who went to Israel in the 30s and the 40s, for some reason, wore a pith helmet. I haven't figured that out yet. Maybe that was the British influence. Here's the first Maccabi Games. Yeah. European Cup victory. We are on the map. This was held in Bulgaria in hang on for a minute. I can't remember the exact date, but I remember exact being there in 1977. All right. In the European Basketball Cup finals were played in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, with whom Israel did not have diplomatic relations. The El Al flight that brought the team was the first Israeli plane ever to allow to land in Yugoslavia. The second flight, filled with fans, landed 2 days later. The victory was a key event in forging Israel's national identity. Here's the first El Al Israeli flight since the Six-Day War, Ben Gurion Airport, Belgrade, with the Maccabi basketball team, which faces Mobile Gigi Varese, Italy, in the European Cup final. Now, this was the fans. El Al Jumbo Jet special flight, Ben Gurion Airport to Belgrade, with Maccabi fans from Maccabi Tel Aviv in the European Basketball Cup final. Let me tell you about what the atmosphere was like in Israel. The Israeli TV went out that night and into the streets of Tel Aviv, which are normally packed with people at night. In Israel, at that time, most of the apartments did not have air conditioning. So the people used to come home from work, have a shower, and get out and go into the streets. You could have your hair cut at 12 o'clock at night. You could buy shoes at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's kind of weird. And the streets were absolutely deserted. There was not a person in the street. Everybody was sitting inside watching the game on TV. And the television people managed to find one little old lady walking down the street. And they said to her, what are you doing here? What's happening? Don't you know what's going on? The Israeli team is playing Belgrade. They're playing basketball in Belgrade for the European Cup. And she turned around and said to them, basketball, schmasketball. I just want to get home. I'm tired. And it was like a complete anticlimax. And when they got back, right, when they got back, they flew them in a helicopter around Tel Aviv to show them off. This is a special flight in the Maccabi Games again, the opening of the 10th Maccabi Games, also in 1977. Here you can see it's the special flight to the opening of the 10th Maccabi Games in the Ramat Gan Stadium, and they show you here a little cachet, a little stamp with judo on it, or as we call it, Krav Maga. And here's the reverse of the stamp. Unfortunately, what happened here in 1997 was a tragedy. To get to the stadium where the games were being held, they had to cross the Yukon River to get to the Yukon Park. So they built a bridge for the athletes to enter the stadium. And the first group that went over were the Australian group, and the bridge collapsed. It was a catastrophic failure of the pedestrian bridge over the Yukon River on July the 14th, 1977. Unfortunately, the Yukon River was totally, contaminated, because the power station used it. It was in an industrial area, and one person was killed and 3 people actually died because they had swallowed the water. It was a terrible thing. The collapse of the temporary metal and wooden structure killed 4 and injured more than 60 Australian athletes and other team delegates who were visiting Israel to participate in the Maccabi Games. The whole country went into shock. The Australians were decimated. What happened there? Here we go. Atlanta, Israel at the Olympic Games, Atlanta 1996. Oh, we made it. Can you see we even had a special flight from El Al to the Olympic Games. Very happy about that. Okay. In 1945, there was a philatelic exhibition in Tel Aviv. They produced 2 stamps. The one is in red, one is in orange. This was for the dark blue cachet, registered postal card, postmark the Philadelphia exhibition, and sent to London. They've still got Palestine stamps on it. Airports, here's another diversification. We must be the only country in the world where they issue first day covers and covers for airports. This is Ben Gurion International Airport. This is when they open up Terminal 3. They have a bust of Ben Gurion in the airport. They issued 2 first day covers. This one happens to be signed by the designer. Ben Gurion Airport is located on the outskirts of the city, 12 miles southeast of Tel Aviv city center. It's operated by the Israel Airports Authority. It's a beautiful, beautiful airport. It's been rebuilt several times. If you ever go, it's lovely. I have diversification again. Military airmail, World War II, Allied forces stationed in Palestine. This air letter was mailed by a Palestinian Jew named Max, stationed at the base accounting office in Kenya, at the RAF in Kenya, and he was writing home to his wife in Herzliya Gimel in Palestine, written in German. It was an air letter, East African Air Forces, Kenya to Herzliya, Israel, passed by sensor number 1101. Polish delegation, Nairobi, Kenya to Haifa, airmail cover with AF2, large black handstamp, sensor stripe, Egypt sensor, letter mailed by A. Goldberg, Polish delegation, Nairobi, with Uganda stamps on it. Should this be in Israel, Aerophilately? I leave it up to you. Maybe that's a question. I don't know. I'm calling it Israel Aerophilately. Another very interesting story here. In 1948, the Egyptian army advanced into Israel and got as far as Gaza and got bogged down, and they could not get in. So what they did was they sent an expeditionary force up through Jordan and to Bethlehem, because Bethlehem is about 5 miles outside Jerusalem, and they were going to attacked Jerusalem from the Jordanian side. Unfortunately, what happened was that in between them getting through to Jordan and marching all the way up Jordan to Bethlehem, a ceasefire was signed by Egypt, and now they were stuck. They couldn't get back home because Jordan doesn't have an entrance into Egypt. So they sat in Bethlehem from 1948 through April 1949. They just couldn't get out. So what happened was there was a whole big thing. The United Nations got involved in it. After 1948, even though Bethlehem was on the West Bank, which was occupied by Transjordan, the Egyptians remained in control of the city until the West Bank was formally annexed to the Jordanians on April the 26th, 1949. Eventually, they did get out because Jordan had a customs agreement with Lebanon. So they went from Jordan into Lebanon and back to Egypt by boat. A rather strange thing, and not many of these are around. It's rather scarce. Even scarcer is the last day of Egyptian occupation, where they used Egyptian stamps, stamped at last day cover, and it's stamped Bethlehem, as you can see, and it's written in Arabic because it didn't have to be in English anymore because it was going through Lebanon. On the 26th of April 1949, the West Bank was renamed from Transjordan to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Went back again. This cover is posted in Bethlehem, 30th of April 1949. British mandate single. This is the British mandate stamp. Single circle cancellation used by the Egyptian Post, ranked with 2 Egyptian airmail stamps. And also 2 King Farouk, 1 mil definitive issues, hand stamped in back, last day cover. I have shown this at several people at 7 shows, and no one had any knowledge of this whatsoever. We don't know how many were actually produced. We don't know. It's a complete mystery, but I'm lucky to have one of them. What? Oh, you're going back?
Yeah.
Are you going back?
That was the last slide.
Huh?
That was the last one.
Oh, that was the last one. Okay. Well, I'm going to cheat.